back with Exodus chapter 17. God's provision and protection for Israel. We left off last week with the wanting some manna, needing some bread. And God gave them not only bread, but He gave them meat. He gave them some quail to eat. They go a little bit further down in their path, and they complain again. That's where 17 starts as. So, Exodus 17, verse 1 through 4, and all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Zin after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. We talked about last week the wilderness of Sin is really the wilderness of Zin, or 2 weeks ago. It's just a desolate place is what it is. But because of their crying and their moaning, they do have a lot of sin in there because of that. But so they went to this new place called Rephidim. Now, later on in Deuteronomy, and I think it says it in here, maybe it's a different one I was reading, they do go a couple of places in between, okay, some stops, but they're not mentioned here. It's mentioned later on as they go through and kind of review their path that they've gone through in Deuteronomy. But nothing really happened in here. They traveled for a few more days, and they said they pitched their tent in Rephidim. There was no water for them. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, and said, Give us water, that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. Now, as we go through the Bible and we study a little bit, it seems like the Middle Eastern people have a way of hyperbole, really overstating something that's not really that prominent, as far as it may be to us it may be a blister on our finger, but to them their arm's cut off. It just seems like something that they are making a big thing out of. We saw that last time when they had bread, didn't have any bread to eat. They were just complaining, and it had just been a few days, and they hadn't even ran out of food yet, but they were saying, well, if we keep doing this, we're going to run out of bread. And so they weren't at the point of starving. Same too here, and I don't want to get the PETA group on us or anything, but I would be more worried about me getting something to drink than my cattle, if it comes down to it. I could eat my cattle, and they had milk and stuff like that. But so to me, I know they were in a dire strait, because you got 2 million people out there, and if you got a canteen, that ain't going to work. Just a little bit of water is not going to take. It's going to take a lot of water to feed all those people, water all those people and all their animals too. So Moses, by this time, he had already kind of, and I'm not saying, he kind of knew what to do in certain situations. And every time it was to go to the Lord. Before, he would kind of hesitate a little bit, but now it seems like he goes right to the Lord. He said, look, they're about to kill me because they don't have any water. They were doing what did God tell them to do? Follow the cloud by day, and the fire by night would take care of them. And they did, and they were led out to this place. So why do they think, and they've already seen water, be sweetened for them from the pool that was bitter. And then later on they had the 12 pools that they could get out of, the 12 wells, and the shade tree to give them shade. And then they wanted something to eat food-wise, and God gave them that, gave them the bread and the quail. To me, I know it's hard to fathom maybe, but if he's done that so many times, why do they not think he's going to do it again?
Yeah. Because they didn't trust him.
They didn't trust him. That's exactly
They
right. They
didn't
didn't have the belief. They didn't have enough faith to believe God could take care of them. He led them out there.
Even though they went that far, so far with him.
That's right. They'd been quite a ways so far. Last month, or last time we talked 2 weeks ago, it had been a month since they left Egypt. Now it's a few days later. It's 35, 6 days. I'm not sure exactly how long it was, but it had been a little while longer, and they still, I guess if you would only have a certain period of time, but you've seen all this happen in a month. And right before that month, the 10 plagues, and God took care of all that and got them out of Egypt. I guess it's just human nature. We want things easy. We want things the same way each time, every time. It's like, why did we have to leave back there? We had 12 wells. That would have been a great place, to stay. It's just, but God didn't want them to stay there. God wanted them to move on. He wanted them to move on to where the promised land was. And they hadn't as yet. They were following after a cloud that followed them. Led them, and then the light protected them. And it's just, to me, it's just crazy that they would try to push this off and say, oh, God's led us out here to kill us. Moses has led us out here to kill us. That's not right. That's just not right. It says, yet when the people, says this was not an imaginary problem, and the people were right to be concerned, yet when the people then contended with Moses, they didn't respond with spiritual thinking or actions. They started thinking again with their head and not looking to God. So, and that's what Moses did. He turned right around and he said, what am I going to do? I can't fix this. There's nothing that I can do that's going to fix this. They were out there, and 2 million plus people.
Yeah, but he's not supposed to.
He's not supposed to, but God had a plan. But God didn't tell him. A lot of times God doesn't tell us what's going to happen down the road to us, even the day approaching. This has not been an easy road for him. God didn't say that I'm going to take you on the easy path. He said he's going to lead you and guide them, and by that, he was actually leading them and strengthening them, making them to lean upon him, to learn from him. So it says Moses cried out to the Lord, and the lack of water wasn't Moses' fault. Yet as the leader of Israel, he had to lead them to the answer. And he didn't know, so he went to God. One of Moses' most characteristic and praiseworthy traits was that he took his difficulties to the Lord. That's the most important thing, probably, of this scriptures that we can recognize. Whenever something comes up, if we try to handle it, we're most likely going to mess it up. Now, we live day to day, don't we? There are things that we know how to do. We go to work, we do all these different things, but then we need to ask the Lord on different things is what he wants us to do in certain situations. And that's leading us each and every day. Brother Epperson, you mind reading 5 and 6?
And the Lord said unto Moses, go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smotest the river, take in thine hand and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon this rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel.
So because of this, God told him to go do this. Go take your rod and hit this rock. Now, logically, we're like, what? You want me to what? We've hit a lot of rocks, haven't we, in our time, Brother Epperson? I've never gotten water out of a rock. But that's what he wanted him to do. But to Moses, God telling him, go get your rod, that rod represented a lot to Moses because he had already seen it change to a snake, eat up the Egyptian snakes. It was the one that parted, he told him to use it to part the water, do all these things. That rod had become, I don't want to say a crutch for him, but it became so where he would rely, God gave him something to give him some confidence that it was going to happen. And it was God's word. So they went to this rock, it's called Oreb, and they smote it. He hit the rock, and this time God told him to hit the rock, and he did, and water started coming out. Now he gathered the people around, he gathered mainly the elders, so they could see what was happening. Here again, how much water could that be coming out of that? 2 million gallons. 2 million people. That's a lot of water.
It's like a river rushing out.
Our mind cannot comprehend how all this happened.
Mm-mm.
You take 2 million people trying to cross a river, the Red Sea and all of that. It boggles the mind how this happened.
Just imagine getting 2 million people trying to cross the Arkansas River.
Oh.
That's basically, and that's small compared to what the Red Sea, I would say, is probably like crossing the Mississippi. It's probably like a mile wide. That's amazing that happened. Now, how to feed 2 million people with quail, with the bread, the angel food, basically the bread of heaven.
Yeah.
And now to water them again, to take care of it.
Like a river.
It burst open. When they did, when the people saw it, I imagine they started digging ditches and digging, wells and everything to store up this water because they needed the water. They had to water their animals, and it was just going everywhere. So I'm sure they started taking care of it. But the people saw it. Now, did God get mad at them?
No.
Didn't say here he did. A little later in Deuteronomy it said, you tested me, I think it said, or something like that, that you were every time that they were speaking against Moses, they were really speaking against God. Because they were saying, well, God's not big enough. He took us out of Egypt, but he's not big enough to do this next thing. But he was, and he did. Each one of these miracles, again, it's like get used to different. It's one of those things, different is going to become our way of life. And that's the way it had become. They had been so set on their lives, each and every day they'd get up and go make the brick and, come home, and the next day they'd do it again, make more brick because they was building buildings and all these. Each one of those had been so commonplace to them, it had become routine. Now God has messed it up for them as far as, I want you to rely on me. I don't want you to rely on Egypt. I don't want you to rely on you, yourself. I don't want you to rely on Moses, even. But they kept going to Moses because he was the leader for them. Now it says this was a remarkable miracle. Moses and everyone else knew that the water doesn't normally come from rocks, at least not this way. It was generous because it had to feed those, millions of people. God didn't utter a word of reproach against them. But in spite of their impatient unbelief, he provided water from the rock. It was also a meaningful miracle. In striking the rock, Moses acted out a drama that he didn't even really understand. Because later on, Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians of the Israel in Exodus, they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. It goes back that this is again a type and a shadow. Christ was beaten, and because of that beating, the rivers of water are freely flowing for us today. That we can have that water that he offered to the Samaritan woman. It says here, in a type of Christ that was stricken and smitten of God and afflicted. Exodus 7, do you want to read that for us, Sister Iris?
And he called the name of the place Massa and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not?
Mm-hmm. Now, Massa means, or however, means temptation. And where's the other? Meribah means chiding or strife. So he called them, that place where they were at, you're tempting me and you're striving with me. He didn't answer them harshly, but it seems to indicate he's kind of getting a little short, a little tired of this. They're not following his directions. Darla and I was talking about the other day, the difference between dogs and dogs and cats. Dogs have a memory span, what'd you say, about a day or two? It's a pretty short time. I mean, they can learn stuff and they get it in their mind, but to remember something and go back to that very same thing after one day, after a couple of days they'll forget it if they don't keep doing it. Cats, about 3 or 4 days. They'll remember it 3 or 4 days. We got a little kitten that's been coming up to our house, and it's about every 3 or 4 days, and sure enough, we'll feed her. She knows to come back.
Oh, I got that.
But but in between times she's not there. But still yet, but the people here, they have about that same time span, that same memory. They remember from the day before, maybe. And that's about it.
Cats will come up to you and look at you. Well, anytime now.
Yeah, anytime. I'm here. Why don't you wait on me?
They're not even my cats.
You're waiting on me. That's right. So because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? How can they even say that? I mean, yeah, they can say that, but without what they have already seen, it seems like that's just crazy. But yet we do the same thing a lot of times. We see things happen before our eyes, and it's just miracles. But we just say, okay, well, that's modern medicine for you, or that's this, or that's that, or that car just whisked past me, and for some reason I got delayed and I was hit. We just need to realize God's taking care of us each and every day if we'll allow him to, and seek after him. It says later, when Israel remembered God's provision in the wilderness at the Feast of Tabernacles, they had a specific ceremony where they recalled this miracle of water from a rock. In that exact context, Jesus said, If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. That's what we was talking about before. So that ends this portion of the water, this temptation that they had. And as they were getting ready to move on, as they were kind of traveling on, then the next portion starts, verse 8 and 9. Sister Bertha?
Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in
Rephidim? Mm-hmm.
Well,
close enough.
Okay. And Moses said unto Joshua, Choose us out men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with a rod of God in mine hand. Now,
That's good. That's
is
good.
that all?
Yeah, that's good. Amalek was the descendant, Amalek itself, it says then came Amalek, it's the Amalek people, Amalekites, if you want to say it that way. Amalek was a grandson of Esau. Esau was the brother of Jacob. These guys are related. It's been 400 years, but they're related back to them. And they are coming across on this big desert area. They were nomads also, and they ran upon them, and they started attacking them. We don't see the details here. Again, I believe it's Deuteronomy. Let's see. Yeah, Deuteronomy. It tells a little bit more about it, and also in Numbers and some others about how they attacked them. But they actually come up behind them. What they were trying to do is they were trying to pick off what happens when you travel. I know we don't do it this much today, but in the old wagon trains, what would be the one pulling up the rear usually? The back side. The cook's wagon and the cows and whatever he had, pigs, whatever fall on him. That's what they had. It was the baggage, the older people because they couldn't able to keep up, maybe some of the young kids, all that. That was what it was, they assumed was at the back of this, and they started attacking them from the behind, okay, as they were moving over to Rephidim. So he told Joshua, this is the first time we've heard about Joshua from the Old Testament, okay? His name hasn't appeared. Now what does the name Joshua mean? It's the same as Jesus. Joshua is what does it say in here, the Greek?
Hebrew, isn't it?
Hebrew maybe. One of them is one of them is in Hebrew and one of them is Greek. So there's no difference in saying Joshua or Jesus to them. It was the same name in the Old Hebrew. So we see Moses is calling upon someone, here again a type and a shadow, he's calling upon a person that we would call Jesus to help them out. Now, it's not necessarily in that part, he goes and fights for them. He does the battling. Joshua's a fairly young man at this time, and he told him to go out, choose men, and fight with the Amaleks. And tomorrow I'll stand on the hill with the rod of God in my hand. Now, here again, we talked about the rod earlier in the lesson. That rod means a lot to Moses, and it means a lot to the Israelites. They understand what that. So, as they see that symbol, that's going to give them some strength. Now, these guys have been has been slaves to the Egyptians for over 400 years. There's not too many of them that are soldiers. There may have been some of them that had trained, was in with the Egyptian army or was helped them, may have been some servants to the soldiers, things like that. So they may have known a little bit, but they really didn't have an army. And we don't know, Joshua may have been one of those people. That may have been why he called upon him, that he was a man that could lead them if they needed to be in war. But whatever it is, wherever God called him, or Moses called him, he told him that go fight with them, and I'm going to stand up on the mountain, on top of this hill, and you'll be able to see us, and as we go, we'll be encouraging you.
Does it also mean that that they would fail if he let down the rod?
It does, as we find out a little later.
Oh, sorry.
No, it does. So it says, here again, the Amaleks, just to catch up a little bit on that, they ranged over a wide area roughly described as the Negev, or the Southland. So they're in this southern portion of, if you go back to your map, you can kind of look of what it is. But the commentator Clark also said, no doubt the baggage was the object of their avarice. But finding women, children, and aged and infirm persons, they smote them and took away whatever they could, their spoils. They got whatever they could from them. So now they were involved in a war. And the rod of God, there was a combination of the human interest and the divine interest in that rod. God always called it the rod of Moses and honored Moses this way. Moses called it the rod of God. And because of that, he honored God. Darling, you'll read 10 and 11.
So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed.
Okay, now we don't know exactly for sure what God told him, except he's following God's commands. And evidently he was raising the rod up, whether it's straight up or held up, however, we don't know. A little later on it does say, just here in a couple verses, they held up his arms. So evidently he was holding up maybe this way with the rod sideways where the people could see him. It's what we're guessing. So it also means, says both in the Septuagint, which is the Latin version of the Old Testament of the Bible, and the Greek Testament, he's called Jesus. So it's talking about Joshua, which the name signifies Savior. That goes back to the meaning of Savior. Now it talks about Moses, we know him. Aaron, we know him. Who's this Hur? We haven't heard of him before either. I mean, it mentions Joshua and now Hur. It talks about in the Josephus that Hur was the brother-in-law of Moses, or Miriam's husband. So he's got his family there with him. The men of the family is there with him. Aaron on one side and Hur, his brother-in-law, on the other. Okay? So it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. Now these people are not a soldier people. They're not an army as yet. They will become an army. They're learning as they go. They didn't have many weapons. They may have got some from their Egyptians as they left, but they really didn't have a whole lot that they could depend on except what they had. And it may have been staffs and rods of some sort, and maybe a sword if they had one. We just don't know. But they did prevail when Moses held up his hand. Now, how long do you think you could hold up your hands?
Oh my gosh.
Not very long sometimes. As we get older, it seems like it's not very long at all.
Especially holding something in your hand.
That's right. That's one question that they asked, I read the other day, I think it was on Facebook. They had a glass that was half full of water, or half empty, whichever way you want to call it. But that wasn't what she was asking, or the professor was asking. They said, how heavy do you think this is? And they go, oh, it's not very heavy at all. And of course, they was holding it out like this. They said, okay, well, if I hold it for an hour, it's going to get heavier. Well, if I hold it for 2 hours, it's going to get heavier. The weight of the water doesn't matter. I mean, it does, but it gets heavy. So that staff, to us, it may not have been very heavy. Yeah, I can go for it. But when you have to hold it up that long, it's not really the staff you're holding up, it's your arms.
And the arms
That are arms given out. I can hold my hands up for about 4 or 5 minutes, and they start getting tingly and everything else, so I have to get them down.
We used to have to hold our rifles over our head. It started out, oh, this is okay.
Yeah.
And after a few minutes, I mean,
And that's for like going through water and stuff to try to keep it out of the mud and all the brush and everything, yeah. yeah, to hold anything for that long is going to be painful after a while. So they had to come up with something when he let his arms down, because Moses had to get some relief, and evidently he did. He'd put them down, and then they'd see the tide changing. The Amaleks, they would start winning. So as they saw this, his brother-in-law and his brother, they come up with a plan. Janet, would you read 12 and 13 for us?
But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side, and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of a sword.
So they did have some swords, okay? They did have some weapons. But they called Moses over there, and they got a rock for him to sit on. Now, here again, sitting on a rock for 5 minutes is okay, but for very long it gets pretty tough.
Yeah.
But at least he's given him some comfort, and they are then bearing up, showing us that we can't go through things alone. We have to have people to help us. Okay? God realizes that. He made us, he didn't make just one person. He made two people when it started, because he knew that they would, going to have to rely upon one another. He saw immediately after he made Adam, he said, he needs a helpmate. So he made him a helpmate, somebody that could help him with his load. So as Moses' hands become heavy, his brother and his brother-in-law helped him hold this up. It says, prayer is sometimes sweet and easy. Other times it's hard work. This is why Paul described the ministry of Epaphras as always laboring fervently for you in prayers, and why Paul wrote, we must continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving. Now you had Joshua down there fighting the physical battle, but Moses and Aaron and Hur was fighting the spiritual battle up above. As Moses, and you may realize, praying and trying to keep the focus on God. I'm sad to say, I was walking down the street today trying to pray, and boy, my mind would just flitter off, and I was doing something else again. Our little granddaughter, I can't get that the finger song out of my head while I was walking down. No, you know, and I was like, quit it, I'm trying to pray.
But Grandpa, I'm in your mind.
I know, that's what it was. I was going down the street, and just 2 minutes, a few steps later, I was doing it again. I'm like, man, I can't concentrate on this. What's going on? So, anyway, it says that his hands got heavy, and he had to have the help. But with their help, he was steady to the end of the day, till the setting of the sun, and because of that, they won the battle over the Amaleks. It says Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Because of this work of prayer, Israel was victorious over Amalek. We are left with no other option than to say, if Moses, Aaron, and Hur did not do the work in prayer, Israel would have been defeated and history would have been changed. So we just need to realize we need somebody behind us helping us, pray. We need to be praying for our minister when he's preaching to us, or whoever is ministering to us, teaching, all this stuff. We need to be praying for them, that they would speak what God would want them to
I
say.
like the way Brother Epperson says it every week.
Mm-hmm. But Joshua still had to fight, didn't he? The battle wasn't just happening by itself. Now later on, God would prevail, and they wouldn't even have to fight sometimes. But in this particular instance, he's teaching them. You guys need to learn how to fight, because these Amaleks are kind of basically the same as you are. And they're a bunch of, guys out there that, you can fight with them. If they come up against the Egyptian army, no, they'd probably get wiped out. That's why God had to teach them over and over again with these different battles, how to take care of these people until they were ready. The Philistines, when they come up against the Philistines, that's a battle. That's going to take a lot of work and a lot of prayer. Brother Harold, you want to read 14, 15, 16 for us?
And the Lord said unto Moses, Write this for memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, Because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation.
It's amazing. He's a cousin, or third cousin, fourth cousin, whatever but they're the ones giving them some trouble. And later on we see even Haman. They said later on Haman, I think, was an Amalek or related to him. And God eventually, Saul was told to wipe them out. And he got the king and some of the sheep and all that stuff and went back to Samuel and said, oh, we took care of it. We did what you told us to do. And he goes, what's this bleating of the sheep that I hear in my ears? You didn't do what I told you to do. These guys became a thorn in their side all through their generations until even later on in the old part of the Old Testament. But they told them to write this down. This is the first time that we see in the reading from the Old Testament to write something down, because they wanted this to be a memorial unto them. So they did. They were writing this down. And because they called it, said Moses built an altar. He didn't build it for Joshua. He didn't build anything like it as a tribute to Joshua. He built it to God. And the name, Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is my banner. The Lord is the one that won the battle. That's what they're saying. There's the one that we... And why did he say that? Because they could look up and see Moses and them. They're the ones, because we could see that we call it a banner or a flag wave, because we could see what they were doing, they were still praying and going for us. God become our God because of that. He became the winning victory. The idea is that God is victorious in battle and the flag of victory is lifted high. The same word is used of the serpent a little later on in Numbers and in other passages. So we see it takes both the spiritual and the physical to win the battle. And because of that, they did win the battle. And it says in the last portion of that, the Lord has sworn the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And here's some that I talked about earlier. Balaam, he's a familiar one that we know of in the Bible. Saul, and then a little later on, Amalek. Hezekiah goes all the way. It says some indications that there were some descendants of the Amalekites around as Hezekiah was even there. So because of God's strong command to battle against Amalek until they were completely conquered, many see the Amalekites as a picture of our flesh, the unspiritual aspect of man that makes war against the spirit. And I think, again, that's a type and shadow of us, because it's constantly battling. We have a battle against that each and every day. And we have to battle that flesh, just like I was talking about earlier. I got to keep my focus, and it's hard to do sometimes, to keep that focus on us.
The Holy Spirit is a comforter. It comes alongside, and there, to help us. Aaron and her were
they were
example of the Holy Spirit
of the Trinity,
holding it up.
They were. It's so rich. The Old Testament is so rich in that, showing it. As they were living it, they didn't understand it. But then later on, when the learned individuals, even though they were Pharisees and Sadducees, they started to put these together, and Paul put it together. These are all of Christ. You know, this whole thing, he put it together in his mind. And I'm sure others did too, but he was one that stood out early on that saw it. And we know Apollos and some of the others that took on the mantle that knew the history very well of the Jewish people. So, well, we'll be back on chapter 18 in 2 weeks. Thinking.
Yeah, travel
Yeah.
horses and have fun.
That's right. Hello, Brother Bill. Everybody say hello,
Hi,
Brother
Brother
Bill.
Brother Bill.
Hi, Brother Bill. He let me know Sunday that we didn't say hi to him.
Yeah, I know. We do.
And I said, that was Brother Darrell.